American history, there's some dark stuff from way back when. Not even that far ago.
But you won't find it in textbooks because they've tried to erase it. They? Who knows? Let's find out.
All right, so this first one is completely nuts. At one point, the CIA came up with a plan to take out Fidel Castro with an exploding seashell. I am not making this up for clicks. I know it sounds like Saturday morning, like cartoon lunacy, but this really did happen. The US government attempted to take this guy's life apparently hundreds of times, and he just kept managing to dodge the attempts. They started getting pretty creative. I mean, they had to at some point. Exploding cigars, a poisoned diving suit, poison in face cream. The list goes on, but the exploding seashell has to be one of the strangest, and I want to say ill thought out. Like, listen to this plan and tell me it's not a bit of a stretch. So Castro was an avid diver, so the CIA rigged this brightly colored conch shell with an explosive and placed it in one of his favorite diving spots. So the hope was that he'd go to this particular diving spot, find the shell, decide to pick it up, not to mention someone else could have dove into that spot first and found the shell. So yeah, this plan was scrapped for very good reason.
Speaking of completely nuts, up next we have a pretty nasty experiment that took place between 1913 and 1951 and involved testicular transplants. During that time, eugenicist Leo Stanley was the chief surgeon at San Quentin State Prison, aka Cali's oldest correctional facility. The guy was a freak. He started off his career by performing vasectomies on inmates, but soon turned his interests elsewhere. He became fascinated by the effects of aging, believing that decreased hormones contributed to criminality, weak morality, and poor physical attributes. His solution? Yep, trading testes. Stanley began using the testicles of executed male prisoners and transplanting them into older men in an attempt to restore their masculinity. Guess what? It gets worse. Apparently so many people signed up for this treatment that Stanley ran into an issue. He had a supply shortage. His solution? Animals. Oh, but wait, there's more. Eventually Stanley got lazy, and so instead of performing a proper transplant, he instead ground up the animals' parts into a paste, and then he injected that paste into the men's abdomens. Procedure count? 10,000. Wacko nut job? Yes.
Alright, next up, spy cats. Yeah, that's right. The CIA also tried to train cats as spies during the Cold War. There needs to be a cartoon about this, I think. At the beginning, it could actually say, like, based on true events. Anyway, it does sound like a Ninja Turtles ripoff, but this actually was a thing. Project Acoustic Kitty was a CIA project that set out to use cats to spy on the Kremlin and Soviet embassies in the 60s. They had a vet implant a microphone in a cat's ear canal along with a tiny radio transmitter at the base of its skull so that the cat was set up to record and transmit audio. Its first mission? Eavesdrop on two men at a park outside the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. The mission was not a success. As soon as the cat was released, it was run over by a taxi. Further attempts were made. Oh God, I'm sorry. That's funny. Further attempts were made with other cats, but the problem was they were too distracted to be of any use, and nothing productive came of this $20 million project. Yeah, I mean, cats. Why cats? Like, they're just, they do their own thing, man. You can't train them. Acoustic Kitty came to a halt in 1967. The whole thing was a complete secret until 2001 when the CIA documents were declassified.
Okay, next up we have another pretty shady dude who also worked at a prison. Oncologist Chester Southam, working at Sloan Kettering Institute during the 1950s and 60s. What made this guy so bad? Well, he has been known to inject patients with live cancer cells without their permission and against their will. He originally implanted the cells into people who had already received terminal cancer diagnosis, but of course he later went on to inject the cells into healthy subjects instead. His goal in all of this was to see how the immune system reacted to the cells. The answer, not well, albeit the healthy people had better results than those who suffered from already terminal illnesses. Eventually, the doctor went back to treating treating sick individuals, this time at the Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital in Brooklyn, New York. But it was here that his experimentation was met with resistance, obviously, and it was revealed to the public. The result, a big, fat lawsuit, and his medical license being suspended for 1 year, which was later reduced to a probation. He continued to study and practice medicine. That's insane. What the heck?
Next up, we have nukes on the moon with Project A-11-9. So this was a secret plan developed by the United States Air Force in 1958 during the Cold War. A lot of weird stuff going on in the Cold War. The idea behind this was to detonate a nuclear on the moon. Now, you're probably wondering why anyone would want to do something like this. There were a couple reasons. The main goal here really was to demonstrate the military and technological might of the United States to the Soviet Union, who at the time were making big strides in the space race. It was basically just incredibly petty, but scientists were also curious about what would happen if a nuclear bomb exploded on the moon, I guess. They wanted to study things like the impact it would have on the surface and whether it would create any detectable effects from Earth, but the project never actually happened. It was eventually scrapped because of concerns about the potential negative consequences. People were worried about the environmental impact of detonating a nuclear space, as well as the potential political fallout. On top of all that, though, this just would have been a total waste of time.
Next up, we have the My Lai killings, which took place on March 6 of 1968. On that day, the American military killed around 576 South Vietnamese civilians, including some of the most vulnerable members of the community, who had absolutely nothing to do with the ongoing conflict at the time. When the public learned about the atrocity, which was broadcasted in 1969 on major news networks who shared graphic images of the incident, they were not happy. The event became a major controversy, with many demanding the perpetrators responsible for ending so many innocent lives be held accountable for their actions. Platoon Commander Lieutenant William Calley Jr. was given a life sentence, but it didn't stick. At the order of President Nixon, Calley was instead placed on house arrest and then released just 3.5 years later. 26 soldiers were charged in military court, but none were convicted. The war continued until 1975 and resulted in an estimated total of 1.4 million civilian casualties in southern Vietnam.
This next one sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it isn't. Operation Northwoods. So this was a plan devised by the US Department of Defense in 1962. The basic idea was to carry out a series of deceptive and covert operations to create a justification for the United States to invade Cuba. Cuba was seen as a potential threat at the time because it had close ties with the Soviet Union. The US government was worried about communism spreading in the West, and Cuba was seen as a potential domino that could fall. So, Operation Northwoods proposed things like staging attacks on US soil and then blaming it on Cuba, hijacking planes and ships, even orchestrating violent incidents in American cities. Like, the goal was to create public outrage and support for military action against Cuba. Crazy. Luckily, this was proposed, but it was rejected by the Kennedy administration. The fact that it was even brought up, though, as a possibility is incredibly disturbing.
Next up, we have the 1969 Santa Barbara oil spill. The incident took place on January 28th of that year. A Union oil rig suffered a major blowout that caused 3 million barrels of oil to spill into 35 miles of the coastline of Santa Barbara, California. The impact of the environment was catastrophic. An estimated 3,500 seabirds were immediately smothered in oil, as well as countless other marine animals. It screwed the ecosystem, the environment, and the economy. And people were pissed, rightfully so. The only good thing about the incident was that it led to the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, which is an independent agency of the United States government tasked with environmental protection matters and efforts. But surprise, surprise, attempts to undermine the agency have been successful, and that is why we have offshore oil drilling, one of the largest contributors to oceanic environmental issues to date, other than pollution, litter, You guys know what I mean.
Operation Mockingbird was a covert operation carried out by the CIA during the Cold War. The goal of this operation was to influence and manipulate media outlets, both domestically and internationally, trying to spin things to promote certain narratives and agendas. Operation Mockingbird was involved in stuff like planting stories, manipulating news content, even recruiting journalists to act as CIA assets. The idea was to ensure that the info reaching the public aligned with the government's objective and promoting anti-communist sentiment. Now, a lot of what Operation Mockingbird did is still kinda murky, but details have come to light over time through declassified documents and investigative journalism. Now, apparently, even some journalists at the time were spied on, having their phones tapped and stuff as well.
And to finish us off, we have the highly unethical detonation of the world's first atomic explosive, Trinity, which was an exact replica of Fat Man, the explosive device that devastated Nagasaki on August 9th of 1945. And Trinity was detonated just 15 miles away from commercial farms as well as residential homes. Oh, and they didn't warn anyone or evacuate anyone in that surrounding area. So in New Mexico on July 16th of 1945, less than just 1 month prior to the events in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they went ahead and detonated the highly unstable and incredibly under-researched explosive, exposing those living nearby to over 10,000 times the recommended levels of radiation. And some of the radiation even reached all the way to Indiana, which is like 5 states over, which is crazy, which is why this incident ended up on this list.
Creepy stuff, right?
Yeah, creepy, dark, messed up, you name it.
Yeah.
We got it.
You know, what can you do?
Yeah. Not any of these, hopefully. Especially not the second one. That was gross. You guys, always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. We'll catch you next time.
Yeah. Bye.